Eisenhower Hall that day was blazing with light, the kind that made the glass ceiling feel like it was burning the crowd below. Rows of state flags hung heavy and solemn, like a silent formation standing guard over West Point's graduation ceremony. The sharp tang of shoe polish, starch, and lilies drifted through the rows. I sat all the way in the back, pressed against the cold stone wall, like someone shoved out of the family portrait of glory. They call West Point the forging ground of generals. But for my family, that day was nothing more than a stage for my cousin in his crisp white uniform, the shining jewel of our bloodline. There was no place for me in that picture. "Sit in the back. Don't draw attention," my father growled as we found our seats. I remember the look he gave me, half warning, half contempt. He wanted me invisible, a shadow, while the family spotlight blazed entirely on his nephew. My mother was different. She brushed my elbow lightly as if to comfort me, but pulled away the instant my father glanced over. She never dared stand with me. My cousin, the star of the day, beamed under the applause. He'd never spent a night freezing on a forced march, never pressed his hands against a soldier's torn body while mortar fire shook the earth. Yet to my family, he was pride incarnate. Me, I was nothing. I sat still, forcing my breath into slow, steady counts. The rows above overflowed with parents clutching cameras and bouquets. They roared when their children's names were read. I only watched quietly, feeling as if a fist had clamped around my heart. And then it happened. A high-ranking officer entered the hall. His boots struck the stone floor with a rhythm that made the air heavy with each step. I recognized him instantly. Lieutenant General Markham, an old SEAL commander, the man who had led us in a mission I could never forget. He wasn't there as a spectator. He had a reason that led him straight to me. He walked the center aisle, rows parting as he passed. Instead of heading to the seats of honor, he stopped beside me. My chest clenched, pulse hammering. I was used to being overlooked, erased. But the way his eyes locked onto mine, steady, deliberate, left me nowhere to hide. He squared his shoulders, raised his right hand to his temple. A salute. "Commander, ma'am." His voice rang across the hall, clear, precise, deliberate, without a trace of doubt. The entire hall went silent. Hundreds of people held their breath. My family snapped around. My mother's eyes widened in shock. My cousin, just off the stage, went pale as if doused with ice water. My father froze, camera slipping from his hand. Whispers rippled through the rows. "Commander! A SEAL commander! Her!" Heat rushed to my face. Every instinct screamed to sink into my chair, to vanish. But years in the Ranger woods, years crawling through mud and rain, had taught me one rule. When someone salutes you, you stand, and you return it. I rose slowly. My right hand lifted to my temple, answering his salute. All eyes turned. And in Markham's gaze, I saw not just recognition, but a message. Enough. No more silence. The moment stretched into eternity. I heard my heart pounding louder than the brass band. The scrape of chairs, the whispers around me, even my father's harsh breathing and clenched teeth, the sound of the shell he'd built around me beginning to crack. When I lowered my hand, the silence held. Tense, electric. Parents stared at me with a mix of respect and unease. They knew a salute like that wasn't casual. A SEAL general didn't waste ceremony on civilians. He did it only for an equal or a superior. And in those few seconds, the label of failure my family had plastered on me for 15 years collapsed into dust. But instead of triumph, my nose stung. I remembered nights burying my face in a rucksack so no one would see me cry. I remembered every time my own blood sneered. A girl, what good is she? I remembered the nights I nearly quit. And just as the hall around me blurred, a wave of memory dragged me under. Back to when I was 15, clutching a first-place trophy in marksmanship, running home hoping my father would finally hug me. only to watch him toss it into the trash, saying coldly, "Don't waste time on a boys' game." The applause in Eisenhower Hall faded to a distant echo, and I knew, to understand the meaning of this salute, I had to begin with that day. I was 15, sweating through a Georgia summer so brutal the asphalt cracked like sunburnt skin. Our town sat on the edge of Fort Benning. Every morning the air rattled with artillery drills, marching cadences, and by evening the smell of backyard BBQ from soldiers' homes drifted in the wind. Back then, I was just a skinny girl sneaking my grandfather's old pellet rifle out to the backyard. I'd line up empty soda cans on the fence and practice until dusk. My grandfather, an old Marine, hair white as salt, hands trembling from age, was the first to show me how to hold a weapon. "Never fear the trigger," he told me. "It's just a tool, not a monster. What matters is the person holding it." I didn't fully understand, but every time a can spun off the fence, my pulse surged like I'd found oxygen. That year, I joined the high school rifle team. Getting picked was already a fight. The roster was almost all boys. I was the only girl. I wasn't tall, wasn't muscular, but I had patience. While the boys grew restless after 5 shots, I could lie still all afternoon, waiting for my breath to settle perfectly on target. At regionals, against all odds, I took first place. Medal on my neck, sweat soaking my back, I ran home grinning like I'd never stop. I still remember the 2-story wood house, the flag drooping on the porch, the scent of pine mixed with motor oil from the garage. I burst inside, trophy held high like a battle prize. "Dad, I won!" He sat in the living room, white t-shirt, Budweiser sweating in his hand, baseball game on the TV. My father, a former Army NCO who bragged to neighbors about discipline running in his veins. He glanced at me, eyes flat. "That's a boys' game," he said, voice rough as sandpaper. I froze, trophy still in the air. "But He stood, snatched it from my hand, and in one swift motion dumped it into the kitchen trash. Plastic shattered with a crack that echoed through the house. "Don't waste your time. A girl should learn sewing, maybe office work. Guns aren't for you." I went numb. I stared at the broken pieces on top of empty beer cans, felt my chest splinter just the same. I swallowed hard, fighting tears. My mother stood at the sink, hands in soapy water, pausing for only a second before she kept scrubbing. She never intervened when Dad passed judgment. Silence was her armor against storms. That night, I lay awake under the desk lamp, clutching a small notebook. I wrote one line. "One day I'll prove them wrong." I didn't know how. I just knew I refused to live my mother's quiet life of swallowing words. I didn't quit. Each afternoon after school, I sprinted out to the empty lot behind the house with Grandpa's rifle and a stash of Coke cans. I practiced aim, breath, patience. Sweat ran down my nose, ants bit my ankles, mosquitoes buzzed. But when I pressed my eye to the sight, the world vanished except for the target. Sometimes Grandpa came out, sitting in a folding chair, cane resting on his knee. He never stopped me. He only said, "If you're going to chase it all the way. The Army doesn't need half-hearted soldiers." I'd bite my lip, squeeze the trigger, and watch cans explode. It felt like I'd found my own language, a language my father refused to hear. At school, people started calling me Sniper Girl. Some said it as a joke, some with respect. I didn't care. When the scoreboard went up, my name was at the top. Every excellent shot from the coach warmed me more than any hug I'd ever waited for at home. But my family, they ignored it. If they mentioned it, it was only to mock. What's the point of a girl shooting, planning to enlist? Who's gonna marry you then? Dad smirked, eyes dripping with contempt. One night, I sat in the car outside a bar, waiting to drive him home. Through the glass, I heard him brag to friends. "That girl's a lost cause. My nephew's the real hope of this family." My hands clenched the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. Then came the day that cut me open. I got home to find Grandpa's rifle missing from the garage. I ran to my mom. She avoided my eyes. "Your father took it." I stormed into the living room. Dad sat watching TV, the rifle propped in the corner. "Why?" I demanded. He didn't look at me. "I told you enough. Don't touch that thing again. I won't have my daughter be a joke. But I'm good. I just got picked for nationals." "Good for what?" He spun around, eyes sharp as blades. "You'll never be a soldier, not under this roof." It felt like a slap. My throat locked, but for the first time I stared him down. "I don't need this roof to become a soldier." The air froze. He barked a laugh, turned back to the screen. "Let's see how long you last." That night I slipped onto the porch. Grandpa sat there, a Dr. Pepper sweating in his hand. He passed me another, tabs still cold. "You angry?" he asked. I nodded. "Good. Keep the fire, but remember anger's not enough. Discipline is what makes a soldier." I looked at him at the lined face and eyes that saw farther than mine. "I believe in you," he said. "One day you'll walk out of this yard and they'll never dare look down on you again." I held the can tight, eyes stinging. That night I swore I would leave this house, whatever it took. From then on, I threw myself into training. Cross-country runs, lifting with the football team, sneaking sniper manuals under my pillow. Every morning I ran before dawn, earbuds crackling with country rock guitar riffs syncing with my heartbeat. I learned to live with pain. I learned to swallow tears. At school, some admired me, some laughed. I grew used to both. What mattered was that I felt myself harden, sharpen. Every time I stepped onto the range, I wasn't the girl banned from shooting. I was a fighter forging herself. At home, nothing changed. Dad's coldness, Mom's silence, my cousin's rising glory. Relatives buzzed about West Point. I sat in the shadows at family dinners, invisible. But shadows gave me fuel. Every time I heard Dad praise my cousin, I ran an extra mile, did 20 more push-ups, fired 50 more rounds. I turned his contempt into my gasoline. I'll never forget that winter night. Snow blanketed the yard, breath turning to smoke, fingers numb around the rifle I'd borrowed back. Through the sight, the world narrowed. I squeezed and the soda can shattered, shards glittering in the cold like cheap fireworks. I laughed, a laugh I'd never dared inside that house. In that instant, I knew I was going to join the army, not to please my father, not for their approval, but to prove to myself I was neither weak nor unnecessary. That night, I opened my old notebook from age 15. Beneath my first vow, I wrote another line. "One day, they'll have to watch me, and they'll be silent. When people ask me what moment made me a soldier for real, I don't talk about the firefight in the Middle East. I don't talk about that salute in the stone hall. I talk about a cold autumn morning at Fort Benning, when mud swallowed me to the waist, and I still had to crawl 2 more miles with a rucksack nearly as heavy as my body. But to explain that, I have to start earlier. I was accepted to West Point. The day the letter came, my father didn't congratulate me. He smirked and said, "Let's see how long you last." Those words shadowed every step I took along the Hudson during my first cadet march. West Point wasn't heaven. It was a forge in every sense. I still remember day 1 of basic, hair hacked short, brand new combat boots carving blisters into my heels, cotter voices machine gunning in my ears. "Move faster. Don't look at me, look at the ground." The boys sneered when they saw me. I caught the doubt in their eyes. How long could a skinny girl last here? I lasted. I don't know how. Every night when the barracks finally went quiet, I lay awake under my blanket, replaying the night my father threw my shooting trophy into the trash. I let that humiliation burn into fuel. I woke an hour early to run extra laps. I dropped to the floor at night for push-ups until my arms went numb. Once, after a PT test, a big cadet clapped my shoulder with a smirk. Not bad for a girl. I didn't respond. At the next test, I outpaced him by half a lap. He never said it again. 4 years at West Point meant sweat, bloody noses from boxing drills, and sleepless nights cramming tactics. I didn't graduate top of the class, but I graduated with enough grit to aim higher. Ranger school. Ranger. Even the word was heavy. Plenty of male officers never dared apply. I knew if I failed, my father's taunts would become gospel, but backing down was never an option. On the first day, soaked by Georgia rain, I stood in formation as the instructor barked. 40% of you won't make it. Some will quit, some will fail. I don't care who, you'll find out soon enough. I felt eyes on me. Ranger school was 61 days of hell, mud, hunger, cold, sleep deprivation. Nights of 12-hour marches where every step felt chained. Meals were half an MRE split 3 ways. Water filtered from muddy creeks. I remember Dalonga Mountain most. Sheets of rain. A 75-pound pack. I slipped, smashed my knee, the ruck slamming my chest. Behind me, a guy laughed. "Go home, girl." My teeth sank into the strap. I dragged myself upright, step by agonizing step. At the summit, when the squad collapsed to catch breath, I sat silent, blood running into my boots. No one said, "Go home again." During the woodland phase, we built a defensive perimeter and stayed awake for 24 straight hours. I drew overwatch. My vision blurred, body trembling from fatigue. They didn't trust me at first, but when I caught the faint metallic click of the opposing force creeping in, I sounded the warning. The team didn't get rolled. At dawn, the sergeant nodded once. "Good eyes, cadet." That single line carried me for weeks. I can't count the times I wanted to quit. Lying on cold planks with an empty stomach, I thought of raising my hand to withdraw. But then I remembered Grandpa's words. Anger isn't enough. Discipline makes the soldier. So I clenched my teeth and pushed through another day. On the final day, when they pinned the Ranger tab on my shoulder, my hands shook. Not from weakness, but from disbelief. The instructor's nod was all the validation I needed. The smirks, the doubts, the whispers, they were all behind me. Only one man's judgment still loomed, my father's. So I signed up for sapper school. People called me insane, but I wanted to find the edge of my limits. Sapper was a different hell. Explosives, demolitions, engineering. Days of digging, hauling timbers, diffusing mock IEDs. Dirt packed under my nails, skin split across my palms. One night exercise carved itself into memory, building a bridge in freezing water. The river cut like knives. I stood chest deep, holding a timber while the squad hammered stakes. My hands went numb, but I refused to let go. One soldier glanced at me, then gave a short nod. For the first time, I saw real respect in his eyes, not the girl who tries. A comrade. When the course ended, the sapper tab landed on my shoulder, another tiny scrap of fabric, but it weighed like granite. I returned to base with Ranger and sapper tabs stitched above my sleeve. For the first time, the mirror didn't show a girl crying by the trash. It showed an officer no one could dismiss. But when I visited home, my father barely looked up. Every hobby ends eventually. Girls always come back to the kitchen. I didn't answer. I knew I'd already gone farther than his sight could reach. That night, sitting on the porch, I stared into the dark. Inside me was a silence unlike before, not the silence of submission, but of someone who knows exactly where she stands. I remembered my vow at 15. One day they'll be silent. And they were. When my father saw those tabs on my sleeve, even he stopped mocking. He said nothing. And for me, that was enough. Years later, when a SEAL general saluted me before a crowded hall, I understood. Those scraps of fabric had built the foundation for that moment. Without the mud, the rain, the hunger, and the humiliation, there never would have been that salute. But the journey didn't end with Ranger and sapper. Those were only doors opening to a harsher road. The one that led me to Task Force X on the border of Syria. And that road would test who I truly was. When people think of Syria, they picture sand and heat. What I remember most is the smell. A strange cocktail of gunpowder smoke, trash fires, diesel spilled into dirt, and sometimes, faintly, the scent of charred meat from a street vendor still clinging to life. That smell was the battlefield. A smell you don't wash away. It follows you home in dreams. That year, I was assigned to a task force. X. I never say its real name, not even now. We didn't exist in the press, never showed up in public reports. But we were there, in the seams where Syria, Iraq, and Turkey bled into each other. People called it the tri-border, a place where lines on maps blurred into chaos. Our unit was a mix of Rangers, SEAL, a handful of CIA officers, and a local interpreter. I was the only woman in command. At first, some of the SEAL gave me that familiar look, doubt, challenge. It didn't take long before they realized I wasn't there to observe. I was there to lead. Our first operation came under a crescent moon. We loaded gear into dusty Humvees, radios on secure channels, Apache rotors thrumming overhead like metal hornets. I sat up front, map glowing faintly on the screen, headset tight against my ears. "Commander, you got green light," higher command crackled through the radio. I clenched the mic. "Copy, moving." We advanced into a small border village, no lights, just thick, suffocating dark. I heard boots grind gravel, the steady breath of men through masks. Every step felt like a blade pressing deeper into my gut. Then the night ripped apart. An explosion, earth shuddered. A Humvee ahead vanished in fire, a dragon's mouth spewing flame. My ears rang, lungs scorched. "Medic, get a medic here," someone screamed. In that instant, the world shrank to two choices: push forward as planned or turn back to pull men out of the inferno. The map, the orders, logic all said push. But in the firelight, I saw a hand waving weakly. If we left them, they would die. I slammed the radio. "Divert! Form defense! Pull them out now!" Silence for a heartbeat. Then the squad moved like gears locking into place. Under stray gunfire, we dragged 3 bodies from the burning wreck, slapped on tourniquets, shoved them into another vehicle. Sweat burned my eyes. My heartbeat drowned out the chaos. We pulled out, fire roaring behind us. I sat rigid on comms, eyes tracking the flare streaking across the sky, one question echoing. Did I just wreck the mission? The report the next day was dry as sand. "Mission completed, minor casualties." No mention of my call, no mention of the lives saved. To higher command, outcomes mattered more than details. But to me, those living eyes mattered more than any ribbon. I remember a young soldier, face caked in blood and dust, clutching my hand, whispering, "Thanks, ma'am." That weighed heavier than any medal. The missions rolled on. Nights bled into nights, ambushes in deserts so cold our breath froze midair. Crawling through tunnels black as ink, rats skittering across shoulders, heart hammering with every inch. I learned to nap 15 minutes upright, choke down bricks of dry rations, shower from a single water bottle. The team began to treat me as one of their own. One night, around a fire, a broad-shouldered SEAL laughed. "Commander, I doubted you, but you got bigger balls than half of us." The squad cracked up. I laughed too, the weight in my chest easing for the first time. Then came the night that branded itself forever. Raqqa, we walked into an ambush. Bullets hissed, dirt erupted like hail. I hit the ground, radio jammed to my ear. A soldier dropped beside me, bleeding out. I pressed my hands to the wound, blood soaking my gloves. Through the chaos, I saw a gap in our line. If it stayed open, we'd be surrounded. "Cover me!" I shouted, sprinting into the hole. My rifle kicked against my shoulder, round after round. I don't remember how many I fired. I only remember the acrid smoke filling my lungs, eyes stinging as I fought to hold the line. Air support finally roared in. The enemy scattered. We survived. But 2 of ours didn't. I stood silent as their bodies were draped with flags, heart crashing into the sand. If I'd done something different, would they still be alive? No one answered. Back at base, I was summoned. A senior officer, face carved from stone, dropped a report in front of me. "You deviated from the plan," he said. "Yes, sir. You prioritized soldiers and civilians over the target." I stayed silent. He stared long enough to make the air heavy, then closed the folder. "Good call." 2 words, they spared me a black mark that could have ended my career. Task Force X carried on until I nearly forgot what home meant. Every night was a new village, a new outpost, or the floor of a transport crate. I stopped measuring time in days or months. Missions were the only calendar. Once during a drawdown, I sat on a C-130, staring through a porthole. The desert stretched endless, gold bleeding into horizon. I asked myself, if I die tomorrow, will anyone know? The answer came fast, no, and that doesn't matter. What matters is my team knows. When it ended, there was no parade, no flags waving, just silence. We came home quietly. My name never hit a report, no photos, no headlines, just a few lines buried in classified. I returned stateside with only 2 small tabs stitched on my sleeve. Ranger, sapper. My family asked, "So what did you even do over there?" I smiled. "Training." They nodded, unimpressed, contempt flickering in their eyes. They had no idea I had carried a task force on my shoulders. No idea that a decision made in seconds had saved lives they'd never know about. But I didn't need them to know. I carried that truth inside. A scar both painful and undeniable. I was there. And from that deployment, I learned something vital. A commander's true strength isn't in medals or reports. It's in this. When night falls, your people are still breathing. That's why, years later, when Lieutenant General Markham stood in a crowded hall and saluted me, I knew that salute wasn't for me alone. It was for every soul still alive because of a call I made. When I came back from Syria, there was no band waiting at the gate, no flags waving, no family with balloons like you see for others. Just an old bus idling on the tarmac. I sat in the very back, rucksack propped against my legs, eyes on the Georgia fields rolling past the window, dry, faded, indifferent. The sand of Syria still clung to my boots, but no one here cared. We, the ones who'd slept under fire, came home in silence. My file was stamped classified. No medals, no photos, just a few sterile lines buried in a Pentagon database, accessible only to a handful of people. I remember the first dinner back with my family. The kitchen table groaned under fried chicken, collard greens, cornbread, Southern comfort thick in the air. Laughter echoed against the walls. I walked in wearing my plain uniform, boots still dusty. My father looked at me for half a second, then turned back to my uncle. "My nephew's about to get into West Point. The bloodline never dies." He didn't say a single word about me. My mother set a tray of cornbread in front of my cousin, beaming. "You'll make this family proud." Then she glanced at me and whispered, "Sit, eat something." Her voice so small it barely stirred the air. I pulled out a chair and sat quietly. The clink of forks and knives felt deafening. "So what exactly did you do over there?" Then Uncle asked. I smiled. "Training." They nodded, unimpressed, contempt flickering. Training sounded like clerical work. None of them knew I had led men into Syrian nights, pulled soldiers out of burning vehicles under fire, but I couldn't say it, and even if I had, they wouldn't have believed me. After dinner, I sat on the porch, a cold beer sweating in my hand. Cicadas screamed, summer grass thick in the air. My father came out with a cigarette, blowing smoke like he owned the night. "What's next for you?" he asked. "Retraining, maybe another assignment." He snorted. "Child's play, girls always end up back in the kitchen, don't fool yourself." I didn't answer, because I knew no matter what I did, in his eyes I was just a girl. Never a soldier. The months blurred. I was assigned to training recruits. Every morning run, every drill, every tactical lecture, I did it well. But my record stayed empty. Nothing about the tri-border, nothing about the lives saved. Meanwhile, my cousin basked in glory. At every family dinner, the talk circled him. "He'll be a great officer." Maybe even a general someday. I chewed slowly, listening to their laughter and toasts. One night my father raised his glass. Boys are the future of this family. Girls, not so much. The table erupted in laughter. I bowed my head jaw tight, fist clenched under the table until veins stood out. None of them realized I had already gone further than his golden nephew ever dreamed. But because my story was sealed in classified ink, to them I was nothing. There were nights I woke drenched in sweat, echoes of blasts in my ears, faces of comrades flashing in the dark. I'd step onto the porch with a beer, the town sleeping around me, only crickets and distant dogs breaking the silence. And I thought, maybe I am a ghost who existed where no one knows, drifting through a life no one recognizes. I never told anyone about the folded note from General Markham, tucked into an old jacket. My only proof I wasn't invisible, but I couldn't show it, couldn't prove it. To the world, I was still the girl who never amounted to anything. I started noticing the way people looked at me, at the grocery store. You still in the army? I thought you quit. At church. Sweetheart, find a husband, stop running around. I smiled, said nothing. They had no idea I once commanded a task force. No idea I'd stood in the freezing dark making calls that saved dozens of lives. One summer evening, the family gathered in the backyard for BBQ. Smoke curled off ribs, laughter rolled across the lawn. My father raised a toast to my cousin, the boys stepping into a bright future. Then he turned to me smirking, and you, at least help your mother carry the trays. The table roared with laughter. I stood, lifted the tray, said nothing. But inside I swore, one day he will go silent. One day he won't laugh again. So I wore silence as armor. At the base, I focused on recruits, watching them sweat under the sun, their eyes shining with the same fire I once carried at 18. I taught them more than drills. I taught them spirit. Sometimes victory isn't in a report, it's in having your buddy still breathing when the night is over. They didn't fully understand, but I saw trust in their eyes, and for me that was enough. I knew I'd been erased from real life. No records, no glory, no recognition. My family branded me a failure. Society treated me as invisible. But I was still here, still a soldier, still carrying the truth that no one could bury. And one day that truth would walk into the light. On that day I wouldn't need to speak. I'd just stand, and they'd all fall silent. There were years when I lived like a ghost in my own country. Not the kind that haunted cemeteries, but one that breathed, ate, trained at dawn, yet moved through life unseen. I rented a tiny cabin in the Appalachians, 2 hours from the base. Just 2 rooms, a creaky bed in one, a second-hand recliner in the other. The kitchen was bare, eggs, water, and leftover MRE packs stacked in the fridge. Spartan, minimal, just like Ranger School had taught me. Strip life down until nothing unnecessary can weigh you down. At 0430 every morning, I laced my battered running shoes and pounded the mountain trail, lungs burning, heartbeat thudding in my ears. No cadence, no squad, just me, replacing their rhythm with my own. At night, I dropped for push-ups until my arms trembled, showered cold, ate hard-boiled eggs, and read military strategy under a single dim lamp. I didn't own a TV. I didn't scroll social media. Silence was discipline. Meanwhile, my family's dinners were as loud as ever. When I showed up, I sat at the far end, listening as praise rained on my cousin. He aced tactics this semester, my uncle bragged. They say he'll be picked for overseas exchange, my aunt chimed in. My father raised his glass, his eyes skimming past me like I was furniture. That's real family blood right there. I chewed my cornbread and stayed quiet. To them, I was failure embodied. Once my mother called in a whisper, "Your father, he only wants what's best for you." I laughed bitterly. He never wanted what's best for me, he just wanted me gone. She fell silent. That was her way of surviving marriage, pretend not to see, not to hear. I didn't hate her for it anymore, I just pitied her. But inside that silence, I carried tiny flames. I remembered one night in Syria, rain stinging our faces as we crammed into a ruined house after a firefight. A young soldier handed me his last piece of chocolate, grinning. "Ma'am, if I die tomorrow, at least I shared this with you." I laughed, bit it in half, and handed it back. No one dies tomorrow all the way. He lived, and that memory stayed mine, proof I wasn't invisible. Sometimes old teammates called, short, hushed conversations. "You holding up?" "I'm fine." They'd chuckle. "Rangers always say fine, even with broken bones." Then silence. No details, our silence was its own oath. One winter night, I sat on the porch, coat zipped to my chin, coffee steaming in my hands. Darkness swallowed the woods. I fished out an old challenge coin, edges worn smooth, unit emblem faint. To anyone else, just scrap metal. To me, proof that I had stood at the tri-border, that I had made calls no one else wanted to bear. I rolled it between my fingers, the click of metal loud in the heavy mountain quiet. Loneliness didn't kill me. It forged me. I learned to talk to myself, to fill notebooks with thoughts I couldn't share. I learned to sit for hours watching rain fall off the porch without feeling wasted. I learned to treat silence as company. But sometimes memories crashed like thunder. Explosions, radios shattering into static, a young soldier's scream. I'd jolt awake, shirt soaked. Step outside, inhale sharp air, count steady. 1, 2, 3, 4, a breath discipline pulling me back from the edge. I even dreamed of the dead. In the dream, they stood beside me, uniform still stained with blood, smiling. One said, "Ma'am, you saved plenty, don't carry ghosts." I'd wake gasping, eyes wet, wanting to believe they'd forgiven me or at least didn't blame me. Life outside kept moving. Neighbors held weekend BBQs, kids running, country music blasting. I watched from the road, uninvited. I wasn't angry. I was used to it. I'd accepted my role as a shadow at the edge of their world. But shadows can prepare. I kept training. Hours at the range, striking drills in an empty garage, body ready for a call that might never come. Deep down, I knew the silence would crack someday. And when it did, I couldn't afford to flinch. I remember my last sit-down with Echo, an old teammate, at a roadside bar. Neon lights buzzing, stale beer stinking, 80s rock humming low. He raised his glass. "One day they'll drag you into the light, and when that day comes, you better be ready." I asked, "And if it never comes?" Echo smirked. "Then we keep living, but trust me, darkness never stays quiet forever." We clinked glasses. The line followed me home, planted deep like a seed waiting for rain. Those years felt like living in a bunker, silence, endurance, training. My family's scorn rolled on. Society kept forgetting. But I knew the storm was gathering. And in the dark, I was ready. Eisenhower Hall blazed under the June sun, glass panels flashing so bright they felt like blades in the eyes. Hundreds of families crowded the seats, dresses crisp, tiny flags waving, bouquets wrapped in cellophane glinting under the brass band's solemn notes. I sat in the back row, as always behind everyone. My father strode proudly ahead, chest out, ushering my mother and the entire clan to seats in the middle rows. I heard his voice booming with pride. "Sit here, perfect view, we'll get clear shots of the boy's face." Heads nodded, smiles bloomed. Not one of them looked back at me. My mother did briefly. Her eyes brushed mine, half a second of pity before she turned away. I was used to it. Then my cousin entered, gleaming in white dress uniform, gold epaulets shining. The crowd erupted in applause, cameras flashing like a lightning storm. Watching him soak it in, I remembered the day I stood in uniform after Ranger school, sweat and blood crusted on my shoulders. Nobody clapped then, not one. When his name was called, my family leapt to their feet, shouting, "That's our boy!" My father lifted his camera, face glowing. I smirked. All their pride funneled into one son. I was just the shadow. The ceremony dragged on handshakes, diplomas, photo ops. I sat still, breathing in counts. 1, 2, 3, 4, just like on night patrols in Georgia's rain-soaked woods. When the rituals ended, the crowd burst apart like a flood, flowers, hugs, laughter, chaos. I prepared to slip quietly through a side exit, disappear like always. But then the impossible happened. A Navy officer in crisp white, edges sharp as a blade, cut across the hall. People parted instinctively. He didn't head for the dais or the honored seats. He came straight toward me. I knew him instantly. Lieutenant General Markham, former SEAL team commander, the man who'd been there, in the tri-border when I made the call that saved his men, the one man who knew exactly who I was. He stopped in front of me. The air in the hall seemed to hold its breath. His shoulders squared, his hand rose to his temple. "Commander, ma'am." His voice carried across the stone, clear and unquestionable. I jolted to my feet. My hand shook, but I raised it in return. Our salute sliced the hall in two. The crowd froze. Parents stopped their cameras mid-click. Officers halted mid-step. The whispers spread like sparks on dry grass. "Commander, who is she? Why is a SEAL general saluting her?" I caught sight of my father's face, stunned, eyes wide. My mother's mouth hung open, her hands trembling. My cousin, moments earlier basking in glory, stared at me, his smile shattered. Markham lowered his hand, stepped closer, voice deep. "Good to see you again, Commander. We owe you more than we can ever say." My throat closed. I only nodded. The murmurs swelled into waves. All those who had dismissed me, erased me, now stared as if seeing me for the first time. From that moment on, no one pointed their cameras at my cousin. The focus had shifted. The questions buzzed. Is it true? Was she really commander? Commander of what task force? My father stormed over, shoulders tight, eyes burning red. He stopped in front of me, voice strangled with fury. "What did he just call you?" I met his gaze. He saluted by regulation. I returned it. "Don't lie to me," he snapped. "The Navy doesn't salute civilians. Commander isn't some joke." I held his stare, said nothing. My mother tugged his sleeve, whispering, "Enough." But he wouldn't stop. He spun on Markham, barking, "You're mistaken, she's nothing." Markham turned, steel in his eyes. "You don't know what your daughter did, but I do, and dozens of my men do. If she hadn't commanded that night, I wouldn't be standing here." My father faltered. His face drained pale, lips moving soundlessly. My mother gripped his arm, eyes wide with fear. My cousin flushed crimson, rooted to the spot. The entire family fell silent. The hours after blurred like a dream. Strangers came to ask who I was, what I had done. I only smiled and said, "I did my duty." No details, no bragging, their curiosity only grew. My father avoided my eyes. No more smirks, no more sneers, just silence. And in that silence, I realized the vow I made at 15 had finally come true. One day they'll be silent. That afternoon, when the family gathered outside for photos, the mood had shifted. No loud laughter, just nervous glances. My cousin forced a smile, but his shine was dimmed. When the photographer called, "Smile," my father placed his hand on my cousin's shoulder. But the other hand, once used to push me aside, rested lightly on mine. I felt the tremor in his fingers. He wanted to speak, but couldn't. The camera flashed, capturing forever the first moment my family saw the truth. That night, I walked to the lawn. Hudson's breeze was cool, the sky washed in twilight. In my pocket, the folded note from Markham still crinkled, the paper whispering between my fingers. I knew then I didn't need to explain. The truth had spoken for itself. All my life, they called me a failure. But one salute, 2 words, "Commander, ma'am," had overturned everything. No reporters, no medals, just that moment. And the strangest thing was I didn't feel triumph. I felt relief. The kind of relief you feel when you finally drop a rucksack after a march that nearly broke you. That shock didn't just change my family. It changed me. For years I lived in darkness, silent, enduring. But that day the light found me and I didn't hide. I don't know what tomorrow holds, But I know this, from that day forward I was no ghost. After that salute in the stone hall, it felt like everything shattered and rebuilt in the same breath. I stepped out into the Hudson afternoon, June's sunlight spilling gold across the stone steps. Behind me the crowd still buzzed, but for me the world was reduced to cool air, river wind, and a relief so sharp it almost hurt. My family trailed out in silence. No more jokes, no more bragging. Just awkward quiet. My cousin tugged at his dress uniform, eyes blinking in the sun, words trapped in his throat. My father stood rigid, face red, hands buried in his pockets as if holding together a wall about to collapse. My mother was the only one to speak. "Are you hungry? Should I get you something?" A fragile, trembling question. I nodded, smiled. Nothing more was needed. That afternoon we sat on the grass by the academy. Other families spread picnics, laughter carrying on the breeze, cameras clicking. My family chewed sandwiches in silence, each bite heavy as stone. I felt like I was sitting in a court without verdicts, no one daring to accuse, no one daring to absolve. Finally, my father rasped, You really are a commander." I sipped water, locked eyes with him. "I don't need you to believe it. I only need my soldiers to still be alive." He dropped his gaze. For the first time in my life, I saw him without an answer. A man who'd spent decades barking orders, suddenly mute. My mother laid a trembling hand on my shoulder. I knew it was her apology for all the years she had stayed silent. That evening, when the crowds had gone, I walked alone across West Point's grounds. The stone walls, the stairways, the ancient trees. I'd marched here years ago as a cadet, sweat soaking my uniform, heart pounding after drills. Back then I looked up at the sky and wondered, would I ever be seen? Now I knew the answer. Recognition doesn't come from family, not from the crowd. It comes from a salute, from a comrade's eyes, from the lives you kept out of the grave. That night, back at my cabin, I hung my blazer over a chair, poured a glass of water, and sat on the porch. The moon floated silver over the ridge, flooding the yard. I pulled out Markham's folded note, reading the 2 lines again. "For the civilians you pulled first. For the blue team you brought home second. Debts like that don't expire." I read it over and over. Each time it felt like a hand on my shoulder, whispering, "You are not invisible. You were there." And we remember. A week later, a text came from an unknown number. Just 3 words. "Bar, Friday, 1900. I knew instantly, old teammates. The roadside bar glowed with neon blues and reds, 80s rock humming low. Inside, 3 familiar faces waited. Echo, the big guy who mocked me on my first Ranger day. Martinez, the young soldier I had dragged from a burning Humvee. Collins, the tiny interpreter we all called Sparrow. We circled a wooden table, cheap beer in hand, smiles tugging. No one spoke of the tri-border. No one retold the details. But their eyes, their toasts, their firm grips all said the same, "We're here because you were there." Echo lifted his glass. "Commander, we saw the news. That salute worth more than 100 medals." I laughed. "Medals don't save lives, decisions do." Martinez nodded hard, eyes wet. "If you hadn't shouted that order to pull back, I wouldn't be sitting here." The table went quiet, each of us slipping into memory. Then Collins broke it softly, voice like wings. "Enough, drink, we're still alive, that's enough." We laughed not loud but deep. Back home, I stood before the mirror. A sunburnt face, a few lines carved at the corners of my eyes. I touched my plain sleeve, no ribbons, no medals, and I smiled, because I didn't need them. What I had was soldiers still breathing. What I had was a truth no one could erase. What I had was the vow of a 15-year-old girl, finally fulfilled. One day they'll be silent. People sometimes ask if I forgave my family. I thought long about it. Then I realized forgiveness isn't my job. My job is to keep living, keep discipline, keep walking forward. I don't need them to acknowledge. I don't need apologies. I just need their silence. And I already have it. That night I sat on my porch, challenge coin rolling between my fingers, moon high, wind whispering through the trees. All the way I murmured, not to remind anyone else, to remind myself that I am still a soldier, whether in shadows or in light. I don't know what tomorrow brings, training, another mission, or a lifetime of anonymity. But I know I've chosen my road, the road of an American ranger. No fireworks, no audience, just the truth. And at last the truth has been seen.